Morning, everyone.
Morning.
I'm going to tell you a story today. And like all good stories, this is a spooky story. So if there's anyone with a nervous disposition, be warned. So we're going to do a spooky story from the server room. So picture the scene. It's your Christmas party. Everybody's having a good time. Everyone's getting in the swing of it. The boss is being a little bit inappropriate. Then all of a sudden, the lights go out. Nobody knows what it is, but there's rumour there's a problem with production. And it's your app. So somebody is going to have to venture down into the server room and find out what's going on, and it happens to be you. So down you go into the darkened server room, you fire up a terminal, and you type the single most scary command a developer can type. Less application.log. And after an hour of trawling through the logs, you pull out this little gem. Error. Unable to stoke the forge due to a lack of dragons.fire. Please call a wizard immediately. Please call a wizard. So this is actually a real log from a real production system. You might recognise it. And it just demonstrates, I think, that the developer that put this in wasn't really thinking about when it might get used. So it turns out that dragons.fire is a property in the properties file which configures Hazelcast. And if there's no value for this property, Hazelcast won't start up. And in this case, spoiling your Christmas party, the application wouldn't start up. So the developer knew all of this when they wrote the unhelpful log message. So why didn't they kind of reveal what was happening? Here's another one. This is full of magic numbers, and I think this is really impenetrable. Like, I can't tell what's going on in this log message. Perhaps if you're looking out for that magic number, that's meaningful, but like, this is actually from my laptop from Apple. So it's some of the core logs from Apple. And again, that's just really unhelpful, right? I think it's not controversial. Here's another one. 2 errors. The plugin manager width cannot be less than 0. That just seems like a fact. Is that an error? Like, what impact does that have? I have no way of telling. And this second one, it just looks like the version number, but it's an error. So that, to me, that's like miscategorized as an error. And if it's important to reveal this information, maybe it should be revealed to the user. And as it goes, that is revealed because you can see what version of IntelliJ you're on through the help menu, right? So these it's a bit of a contrived story, but they're real logs from real systems, and I think that's the real horror story and one that we face every day. So I am, of course, talking about logging. Not that kind of logging. The sort of login that we have with traditional implementations like Log4j or Log4net. Specifically, the kind of notion that we end up with reams and reams of log files, just megabytes, terabytes of log files, just kind of collecting. So a bit like the Greek legends, I think this is a myth. I just don't think they're needed. I think as an industry, we've kind of got it wrong. So what is the problem with logging? As again, I mentioned, it's kind of traditional implementations of logging I'm talking about here. And the way that they encourage you to, like, the proliferation of logs. And in this proliferation, the signal to noise it's really hard to kind of get the signal from all the noise, in my experience. And you often wonder, what was the motivation here? So this is Mr. Motivator, if you don't know. And this is only compounded when you're in a cloud environment. So if you're doing log messages and your application is being served from 200 machines on the cloud, you've now got a distributed log problem. So if you're trying to log the kind of request response cycle of a user, you're going to need some sort of correlation ID. And no one's going to give you that for free. You're going to have to figure that out. So if you end up relying on tools like Splunk, FileBeat, Logstash, you're doing it wrong. That's the point of this presentation, I think. The problem's compounded, and if you need to rely on these tools, you're doing it wrong. So what can you do? What can we do better? I think it's all about stop focusing on an implementation first idea that we have these login frameworks and they encourage developers to use the statements and add to this proliferation. And we instead should be thinking about the problem first. So how do we do that? Well, we have to ask why. Why am I using log.debug here? What am I trying to debug? Why am I using log.info? What information am I revealing? And why is that different than an error? So what I'm saying is that we should be looking for the requirement behind this kind of compulsion to log. So what does better look like? Let's try and have a look at an example, a couple of examples. So if you use log.debug, I'm going to suggest that you've got a problem and you're trying to communicate something to the developer, to the development team, to yourself building this app. And there are probably better tools than the log to do that. There are always caveats to this stuff, so we'll talk about that. But the debugger is a tool specifically designed, as its name suggests, to debug problems. And we should be debugging bugs, finding bugs before they hit production, right? So there's an argument, again, to avoid logs in production to debug problems, because you should have found them ahead of time and presumably written a test to avoid them coming back. Similarly, if you've got a log.info, I think you're trying to convey something probably to the customer. And rather than let your message to the customer kind of languish in a log file in the server room, you can move to a more active mechanism. So rather than a passive notification, you could think about an active notification, where as a developer we notify somebody that something has happened and the customer appreciates it. And then finally we've got log.error. So this is an error condition, something that shouldn't happen, and presumably you want to do something about that. So that could be for a support team. So let's have a look at an example here where if we're building an app that sends email, there's a chance that email goes wrong, and rather than kind of log the fact that an email failed to send, we could build something along the lines of, in the event of an error, we store the email that we tried to send and the fact that an error occurred, and let's say we put that in a database. We can then add a task to a support queue where we can use it to update some sort of information radiator, so have some sort of notification that something's gone wrong. And in this case, we've got a big red light flashing. At which point, support are kind of alerted to it. They can look in the database. They can inspect the message, and because we've captured the full payload, they can adjust the error. Let's say it's a recipient that's no longer in the firm. So they can correct the error and replay it using tools we've provided and basically fix the error. We can take it off of the support queue, so they've got one less thing to do, and we can turn this red light green. So we've gone to this kind of active notification, and nothing's in the logs. No logs, not a single line of log. And don't forget, the developer could be the same person as the support. So you could be doing this for yourself, and avoid that trip down into the server room. So kind of what am I talking about here? I'm really talking about looking for the requirements when you normally just kind of reach for login, and really thinking hard about what event has occurred. So what has happened that would cause conventionally you to log. And once you've discovered that event and start thinking about it in terms of events, you can look for the consumer of that event. So who is that event targeted for? Who's the user, the recipient of that event? And what action would they take when they receive it? So I'm really talking about login as a feature. And I think that's a really interesting idea, that if you start treating login as a feature and thinking about things in an event-driven way, and of course if it's a feature, you're going to want to write a test for it. So has anybody tried to write a test for a Log4j implementation? Show of hands. It's not fun, is it? No, I can tell you it's not. So if you think about an event and you decouple the thing that listens to that event from a mechanism like login, then testing becomes easier. So you don't have to try and sort of get inside Log4j's framework, which is kind of hard to do. And instead, you can just test that an event has been raised. And that also means by decoupling that kind of architecture, you can have different listeners to do different things. So you could have a listener that puts something in a database, or that flashes a red light, or, if you must, stores it on disk in a file, like a log file. So I just think, like Log4j, all these logging tools, there's just no place for them in grown-up systems. And I don't say that sort of trivially. So I've worked on more than one mid-size application with lots of users, lots of traffic, and in those systems I generally have less than 5 lines of logs. So there are cases, and hopefully we can discuss some of the things you think are worth logging. But as a general principle, I'm saying logging is bad. And this speaks a little bit to Tim Kerry's talk earlier in the week about operational excellence and zero human touch. So why do you guys have to spoil your Christmas party and go into the server room, manually trawl through these logs to try and glean some problem, or try and call a wizard in the middle of the night? We should be aiming for operational excellence, zero touch. So I realise this is a little bit polarising, maybe. Polarising opinion, it's a little bit controversial. But I think a bit like politics, I think next time you kind of see a log statement, if you're doing a code review or you're coding, I think try really hard to kind of look past the dogma and look past the spin and try and discover the requirement that inspired this log message. And then I think you're in a better position to sort of answer the question of if logging is the right mechanism to use to solve a requirement. So that's kind of the end of my talk. A bit like the sort of controversial debate, I'll be really keen to hear what you guys think. So yeah, thank you. We use Prometheus for instrumentation, for performance monitoring and stuff like that. And we approach that as a specific requirement that we need to understand the throughput of the application, look for trends, and you pick the appropriate technology for that. And Prometheus is a great example of, or just instrumentation generally. So when I kind of said tongue-in-cheek earlier that if you're using Splunk, you're doing it wrong, that's a good example where a lot of teams, and I've done this, have put performance information in a log file because it's easy, log.info, blah, 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 with some sort of key that Splunk can pull out and massage and put somewhere else. But it's this indirection which I've got a problem with. That you're not sitting down to kind of address the requirement. You're using a convenient technology which may or may not be appropriate. And it has other implications, right? Splunk is expensive. Disk space is cheap, but if you're doing it a lot and you've got thousands of requests per second, it's probably inappropriate. A good example I've found where logging is kind of important or is useful is when you've got environmental specific things which you can't reproduce, even in test environments. If you do something like garbage collection logs, so you get, in the Java world, you get the JVM to expose what it's doing in terms of garbage collection. So you put verbose mode on the actual JVM. That's kind of useful, because that's what I would say is a good sort of debug tool, because it's something environment specific, you can't find it anywhere else. You get the tool to reveal it a bit. It's like problem after problem. So you've got potential for disk space problems. So you put a rolling log appender or whatever, but then you're only backing up 100 meg, 200 meg, a terabyte, whatever. But you know what I mean? It's like problem after problem. The point isn't to move this stuff to the database. The main point here is to move from a passive sort of log of information to an active notification. You find a lot of people put stuff in the log in case it's important. I'm saying think about if it's going to be important when you discover the event. So if your disk space, you can run out of disk space and you've got something monitoring that and you think it's important, ahead of time, it can happen, you're going to tell someone, do something active about it. Don't just put it in the log file in case it happens. Because the smell that this kind of reveals a lot is that things go in the log file and they're never looked at. Because, 5 generations ago, somebody thought this thing might happen. And you've got to kind of, if it happens, does the current generation even know to look in the log file or what to look for specifically? Genius is a great example because we use Genius for an external support team to monitor. And they don't know how to deal with red. So like we define what a red probe, what makes a probe red, and there's been a disconnect with this external support team. So they have a dashboard across the firm of like hundreds of red lights at any one time, and they either don't know what to do with it or can't do it, or and there's something wrong there. So why are you going through this sort of motion, these motions of kind of Genios when it's not deliberate? You could take that Genios and put it in a build monitor on your team, because your team are the ones that are going to deal with it, or the support team get an email through this mechanism. And I agree, you can use other tools on top of login to pull this information out, but it's this level of indirection that I've got a problem with. That this stuff should be a first-class thing, not an indirect, convenient thing. Because how many, say, junior developers on the team are concerned with this? Like, I'm concerned with it because I've been through the pain of being woken up in the night with a text message and having to get up and kind of hotfix and work through logs. So I make sure this stuff doesn't happen. But how many like junior guys have gone through that and therefore consider what they're doing when they go log.debug, oh, whatever dragons.fire's run out, please see a wizard. So I take a really hard line approach for this, that I just, like I say, it's a myth. It's just don't tolerate it. Find another way and see what happens. Because I think good things happen, that you get more direct, more deliberate requirements and better sort of support recipes. How many times have you seen in code try catch, so an exception is being thrown, and in the catch, log.debug, then throw the exception. And then the guy that then catches that exception, catch log.debug. So what message are you conveying here? It's all fragmented and disjointed and inconsistent. Whereas if you kind of catch it, raise an event, whatever's broken, such and such not working, and I'm going to tell somebody specifically, Dave, you've left the lights on again, can you switch them off? I've seen lots of systems that have various method calls, and at the start of every method call, log.debug, method X entered at the end of the method, log.debug, method exited. Like, why would I ever care about that? And if I do, why would I use that mechanism? Personally, my approach to this stuff is any requirement which is sort of ill-defined or in your head isn't really a requirement, and it's just wasteful to do it. So I approach things like I'll put it in when I need it. And if I've gone 6 months in a project before I discover I need an extra piece of instrumentation, which I could have speculatively done 6 months ago, then that's a cost that I think it's a good trade-off. Because if you do it the other way around and you try and make up every feature and you log everything you can think of really early, and then in 6 months you use none of it, then that's wasted effort and it's baggage and can have its own problems. So that's like a philosophical choice, I think. Yeah, I think that's a good point. So using like Apache access logs are not in my categorization of logging frameworks. So I think for big tools, I think they're their own ecosystem. That's a good use. So we use Apache logs to work out who's trying to kind of hack our system, that kind of stuff. I think this is really strange. So the same entitlement system that we mentioned earlier has a feature where it notifies a central system that people have been active, that individual users have logged onto the system. And this central, it tells this central system who's using the application. And this central system, if a user hasn't logged on in 6 months, might instigate a sort of offboarding process. So it's kind of a critical mechanism, and it's very deliberate. There's a clear requirement there, and it's all keyed into our onboarding, offboarding process. It's kind of pretty serious stuff, right? This is the stuff of audit. And the mechanism it achieves this is through a log4j appender. So the developer types log.debug, log.info. Bob has logged on at the time, and a custom appender somehow recognizes that and makes like a HTTP call to the central server. So do you think that is a good use of appender? Is that innovative? I think I'll leave it there. Hopefully that was sort of interesting and sort of stimulating to think about how you might look at things differently next time or not. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you.